Welcome back to English Noir. In this video, we are going to learn English through the story of how drug lords wash dirty money. This is a story about billions of dollars, secret bank accounts, and men who built entire empires on crime. The money was real, the danger was real, and the people who tried to hide all of it were some of the most cunning criminals the world has ever seen. By the end of this video, you will understand one of the most important financial crimes in modern history. So stay with me because this story is about to get very interesting. Every year, criminals around the world make trillions of dollars from illegal activities. They sell drugs. They traffic weapons. They run illegal gambling operations. They steal from banks and governments. The money pours in, day after day, in enormous amounts. But there is one giant problem. The money is dirty. It came from crime. And if a criminal tries to spend dirty money openly, the government will notice, the police will ask questions, the tax authorities will start to look, and eventually the criminal will go to prison. So criminals had to find a solution. They needed a way to take dirty money and make it look clean. They needed to create a story that explained where the money came from. A story that had nothing to do with drugs or weapons or crime. They needed to make the money look like it came from a real, legal business. This process got a name. People started calling it money laundering. And no group of criminals in history was better at it than the great drug cartels of Latin America. To understand money laundering, you first need to understand how much money the drug trade actually produced. In the 1980s, cocaine was not just popular in the United States. It was everywhere. In offices, at parties, in the homes of wealthy and powerful people. The demand was enormous. And the men who supplied the cocaine made money faster than they could count it. Literally. Counting the money became a daily problem. They needed entire rooms just to store the cash. They needed people whose only job was to sit and count banknotes all day long. The money was overwhelming. Pablo Escobar was the most famous of all the drug lords. He was born in 1949 in a small town in Colombia called Rio Negro. His family did not have much money. His father worked as a farmer. His mother was a schoolteacher. Pablo grew up in a simple house in a poor neighborhood, but from a very young age, he wanted more. He looked at the world around him, and he made a decision. He was not going to be poor. He did not care how he got rich. He just wanted to be rich. As a teenager, Pablo started with small crimes. He stole cars. He sold fake lottery tickets. He was arrested several times. But the police in Colombia were not difficult to deal with in those days. Many of them accepted bribes. Pablo learned very quickly that money could buy almost anything. Money could buy silence. Money could buy freedom. Money could buy protection. This lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. In the 1970s, Pablo Escobar discovered cocaine. He was not the first person to see the opportunity. Cocaine was already moving from Colombia to the United States through small criminal networks, but Pablo saw something bigger. He saw a business. He understood supply and demand. He understood that millions of Americans wanted cocaine and that nobody was supplying it in large enough amounts. He decided to fix that problem himself. He started small. He moved cocaine in his car. He hid it in his clothing. He paid people to carry it across borders for him. Then he built relationships with the people who grew the coca plant in the mountains of Peru and Bolivia. He started to control the supply. He hired more people. He bought more vehicles. He built his own small transportation network, and the money started coming in. By the late 1970s, Pablo was not small anymore. He was the head of an enormous criminal organization. It became known as the Medellin Cartel, named after the city in Colombia where Escobar based his operations. The cartel controlled up to 80% of all the cocaine that entered the United States. 80%. Think about that number for a moment. Out of every 10 bags of cocaine sold on American streets, 8 of them came from Pablo Escobar's organization. The money was simply unimaginable. Estimates suggest that the Medellin cartel earned somewhere between $20 and $30 billion every single year. Not in total, every year. Pablo Escobar personally became one of the richest men on the planet. At the height of his power, Forbes magazine listed him as the 7th wealthiest person in the entire world. His net worth was estimated at around $3 billion. But managing that kind of money, Money that came entirely from selling an illegal substance was one of the hardest problems he ever faced. The first stage of money laundering is called placement. This is the moment when the criminal takes physical cash, the dirty money that came directly from selling drugs or committing crimes, and tries to introduce it into the financial system. This is actually the most dangerous stage. At this point, the money is obviously connected to crime. There is no story to protect it yet. If someone sees a drug dealer depositing thousands of dollars into a bank, the bank might report it. The police might get involved. The whole operation could collapse. Pablo Escobar and his associates tried many different methods to solve the placement problem. One of the most common methods was to use a network of small depositors. These people were called Smurfs in English, though in Spanish they had other names. A Smurf's job was very simple. They took a large amount of illegal cash. They divided it into many smaller amounts. And then they walked into many different banks, one by one, and deposited small amounts of cash into many different accounts. In the United States, banks were required to report any cash deposit over $10,000. So the Smurfs always deposited amounts just under that limit. $9,000 here, $8,500 there. It was slow, it was repetitive, but it worked. But even the Smurf method had its limits. The volumes of cash that the Medellin cartel handled were simply too large for Smurfs to manage alone. They needed bigger solutions. And so they started to buy businesses. Real, legitimate businesses that handled a lot of cash every day. Businesses where large amounts of money coming in every day looked completely normal. Restaurants were popular. Car washes were popular. Exchange houses, where people traded one currency for another, were extremely popular. These businesses gave the cartel a place to mix dirty money with clean money. The business reported high earnings. The money went into the bank. And suddenly it looked like it came from selling food or washing cars, not from selling cocaine. The second stage of money laundering is called layering. By this point, the criminal has already put the money into the financial system. Now the goal is to move it around so many times through so many different accounts and transactions that nobody can follow the trail back to where it started. Think of it like this. Imagine you dropped a red dye into a very large pool of water. At first, the red color is obvious. It stands out. But if you keep moving the water around, mixing it with more water, filtering it through different containers, eventually the red color disappears. You can no longer tell where it came from. This is exactly what the layering stage does to dirty money. The Medellin cartel used banks in Panama and the Cayman Islands and Switzerland to layer their money. These countries had very strict banking secrecy laws. Bank employees in these countries were legally forbidden from sharing information about their customers with foreign governments. This made them perfect hiding places for criminal money. The cartel would move money from a Colombian account to a Panamanian account to a Swiss account and then to an account in Luxembourg and then perhaps to an account in the United Kingdom. Each transfer created more distance between the money and its criminal origins. Each step made the trail harder to follow. They also used a method called trade-based laundering. This was clever, very clever. The cartel controlled import and export businesses. They would create fake invoices for goods that were never actually sent. For example, a company in Colombia would send an invoice to a company in the United States saying it had exported 1,000 television sets for $500 each. The American company would pay $500,000, but the television sets did not exist. The entire transaction was invented. What actually happened was that dirty money in Colombia was converted into a wire transfer payment from the United States. The money crossed the border legally, disguised as payment for goods. Sometimes they went the other way. They over-invoiced real goods. A cartel company exported coffee or flowers, which were completely legal products. But the invoice said the coffee was worth 10 times its real value. The American buyer paid the inflated price. That extra money, the difference between the real value and the fake value, was dirty money that had just been laundered across an international border. Law enforcement agents describe this as one of the most difficult forms of laundering to detect because it was hidden inside real, legal trade. The third and final stage of money laundering is called integration. By this stage, the money has been placed into the financial system and layered through countless accounts and transactions. Now it comes back to the criminal in a form that looks completely clean and legal. A drug lord could now buy an expensive house, a luxury car, a private jet, or a yacht, and the money used to pay for these things appeared to come from legitimate investments or business profits. The criminal could live openly and spend enormous amounts of money without immediately attracting suspicion. Pablo Escobar's integration of dirty money was spectacular. He bought enormous amounts of real estate. He bought land in Colombia and built ranches. He paid for the construction of an enormous private zoo on his property in Hacienda Nápoles. He kept hippopotamuses. He kept elephants. He kept exotic birds, all paid for with money that originally came from cocaine sold on American streets. He paid for schools and houses and football pitches in poor neighborhoods around Medellin. He gave money to the poor. He built his image as a generous and powerful man. And the dirty money, now clean, paid for all of it. But the story of money laundering does not belong only to Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. Around the same time, on the other side of the world, an extraordinary financial scandal was developing that would eventually be called one of the greatest bank frauds in history. It involved a bank called BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and it was deeply connected to the global drug trade. BCCI was founded in 1972 by a Pakistani banker named Aga Hassan Abidi. Abidi was charming and intelligent. He had big ambitions. He wanted to build the first great bank of the developing world, a bank that served Asia and Africa and the Middle East. He raised money from investors in the Middle East, including some members of royal families. He opened branches in dozens of countries. By the 1980s, BCCI had operations in more than 70 countries and managed deposits of around $20 billion. On the surface, it looked like a genuinely successful international bank. But below the surface, BCCI was rotten. The bank had almost no real rules. Senior managers moved money around in ways that broke every banking regulation in existence. They made loans to favored clients that they knew would never be repaid. They hid losses in secret accounts. They used money from one set of depositors to pay the interest owed to another set, exactly like a Ponzi scheme. But, most relevant to our story, BCCI became a welcoming home for criminal money from around the world. Drug cartels from Latin America moved enormous amounts of money through BCCI accounts. Intelligence agencies used BCCI to fund secret operations that could not be officially approved. Arms dealers moved payments through the bank to avoid detection. BCCI was not just a bank that accidentally accepted criminal money. In many cases, BCCI employees actively helped criminal clients find ways to move and hide their money. The bank offered what investigators later called a full service for money laundering. It helped with placement, it helped with layering, and it helped criminals integrate their money back into the legitimate economy. American investigators began looking at BCCI in the late 1980s. A customs agent named Robert Mazer ran an undercover operation that lasted for years. He pretended to be a money launderer. He met with BCCI employees. He recorded their conversations. He gathered evidence about how the bank helped drug traffickers clean their money. The operation was called Operation Sea Chase. When it finally ended, federal prosecutors in the United States charged BCCI with helping the Medellin cartel launder drug money. Several BCCI employees went to prison. And in 1991, regulators in the United States and the United Kingdom simultaneously shut down BCCI. It was one of the biggest banking collapses in history at that time. Depositors around the world lost billions of dollars. Meanwhile, back in Colombia, Pablo Escobar was having a different kind of problem with his money. The sheer physical volume of cash was becoming impossible to manage. His accountants estimated that the cartel lost around 10% of its cash every year, not to seizures by police or government agents, but simply to deterioration. Rats ate the banknotes stored in warehouses. Moisture rotted the cash hidden in underground vaults. The rubber bands holding bundles of bills together sometimes left permanent marks on the money. Escobar himself is reported to have said they buried so much cash in the ground that they simply forgot where some of it was. Billions of dollars worth of banknotes sitting in the Colombian soil, unclaimed and decaying. The people who worked to count and move Escobar's money described scenes that sound almost fictional. Entire houses filled with cash from floor to ceiling, workers using industrial money counting machines that ran continuously for hours. The smell of money, that particular smell of old banknotes, so strong in those houses that workers said they could not eat their lunch inside because the smell was too powerful. The cartel employed a large team of accountants and financial specialists whose only job was to find new ways to move, hide, and legitimize the endless flow of cash. It was, in a very dark and criminal sense, one of the most complex financial operations in the world. As the 1980s became the 1990s, governments around the world began to wake up to the scale of the problem. The United States government started putting serious pressure on Colombia to stop the Medellin cartel. Authorities began to get better at tracking financial movements. New laws required banks to report suspicious transactions. New international agreements allowed governments to share financial intelligence with each other. The walls were slowly closing in on Escobar and his operation. The Colombian government declared war on the cartel. A special police unit called the Search Block was created specifically to hunt Escobar. The cartel responded with violence. Escobar ordered bombings in Bogotá. He ordered the assassinations of judges, police officers, politicians, and journalists. He put a price on the head of every police officer who came after him. He called this strategy plata o plomo, which translates to silver or lead. He offered every government official a simple choice: accept a bribe, the silver, and work with the cartel, or refuse and face a bullet, the lead. Many people chose the silver, but not everyone did. In July 1991, Pablo Escobar made a deal with the Colombian government. He agreed to surrender and go to prison, but he had conditions. He would only go to a prison that he had helped design himself. The prison was called La Catedral. It sat on a mountain outside Medellin. It had a football pitch. It had a bar. It had comfortable rooms. It had a jacuzzi. Escobar continued to run his criminal operation from inside the prison. He continued to order murders. He continued to manage his money laundering networks. The Colombian government eventually realized that La Catedral was not really a prison at all. It was just another headquarters for the cartel, one that happened to have walls. In July 1992, the government tried to move Escobar to a real prison. He escaped. He lived on the run for the next 16 months, moving between different safe houses, constantly changing his location, using his network of loyal followers to stay ahead of the authorities. The Search Block, now working with American intelligence agencies and a group of Medellin citizens who called themselves Los Pepes, hunted him relentlessly. On December the 2nd, Pablo Escobar made a phone call from his hiding place. He talked for too long. The signal was traced. The Search Block surrounded the building. There was a gunfight, and Pablo Escobar was shot and killed. He was 44 years old. His criminal empire began to collapse almost immediately after his death. But the end of the Medellin cartel did not end the drug trade, and it did not end money laundering. Power simply moved. Other cartels grew to fill the space that Escobar left behind. The Cali cartel in Colombia became more powerful for a time. And then, gradually, the Mexican cartels began to dominate. The Guadalajara cartel, the Juarez cartel, the Gulf cartel, the Tijuana cartel, and eventually the most powerful of all, the Sinaloa cartel, rose to control enormous portions of the global drug trade. The Sinaloa cartel, based in the northwestern Mexican state of the same name, was built under the leadership of several key figures. The most famous was Joaquin Guzman Loera, known everywhere by his nickname El Chapo, which means shorty in English. El Chapo was born in 1957 in a very poor village in the mountains of Sinaloa. Like Escobar before him, he grew up in poverty. Like Escobar, he chose crime as his way out. And like Escobar, he became extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily dangerous. But the Sinaloa cartel was different from the Medellin cartel in one important way. It was more sophisticated. It had learned from the mistakes of Escobar and the other cartels that came before it. The Sinaloa cartel was better at hiding, better at corrupting, and in particular, better at laundering money. Where Escobar had stacked cash in warehouses and forgotten where he buried it, the Sinaloa cartel built more elegant and more durable financial systems. One of the most important money laundering methods used by the Sinaloa cartel was the black market peso exchange. This was not an invention of the cartel. It had existed in Latin America for decades. but the cartels perfected it. Here's how it worked. Imagine a drug dealer in New York City who has just made $1 million in cash from selling heroin. The money is in US dollars, but he needs to get that money back to Mexico in pesos, the Mexican currency, without attracting attention. He calls a money broker. This broker has a network. On one side of the network are the drug dealers in America with large amounts of dirty US dollars. On the other side of the network are legitimate Mexican businesses that import American goods. These businesses need to buy US dollars to pay their American suppliers. But buying dollars through official channels can be slow and expensive. So they are happy to buy dollars from the broker at a slightly better rate than the official exchange rate. Everyone seems to benefit. Here's what actually happens. The drug dealer gives his million dirty dollars to the broker's representatives in New York. At the same time, the broker's colleagues in Mexico give the equivalent amount in pesos to the cartel's accounts in Mexico. The Mexican business then collects the $1 million from the broker's American representative, pays for its American goods, and everybody goes home. The dirty dollars never had to cross the border. They went directly from the drug dealer to the Mexican business. And the cartel received clean pesos in Mexico that came, as far as anyone could see, from a perfectly legitimate currency transaction. This system was enormously effective. It was also very difficult to stop because it used real businesses doing real trade. American law enforcement agencies spent years trying to understand and disrupt the black market peso exchange. They traced millions of dollars moving through the system. But every time they stopped one part of the network, another part grew back. The demand for the service was simply too great. The Sinaloa cartel also used something that, by the early 2000s, had become increasingly important in financial crime. They used the American banking system itself, not in a clumsy or obvious way, not in a way that attracted immediate attention. They did it quietly, carefully, and with the assistance of people inside some of the biggest banks in the world. And the bank that became most famous for its role in this story was a very large and very well-known British institution. It was called HSBC to HSBC, which stands for Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. It is one of the largest banks in the world. It has branches in more than 60 countries. It has millions of customers. And for a period in the late 1990s and 2000s, it became one of the primary banks through which the Sinaloa cartel and other Mexican drug traffickers moved their illegal money. The investigation into HSBC's involvement began when American regulators started noticing unusual patterns. Enormous amounts of cash were being deposited into HSBC's Mexican subsidiary by customers who did not appear to have legitimate sources for that much money. American drug traffickers were sending millions of dollars in cash across the border into Mexico, where it was being deposited into HSBC accounts. The money then moved through the banking system and eventually disappeared into accounts in various countries. Investigators found that HSBC's internal compliance systems, the systems designed to catch and report suspicious transactions, had completely broken down. The bank had deliberately reduced the number of staff in its compliance department to save money. It had failed to monitor billions of dollars in transactions. It had ignored warning signs that should have been obvious. It had classified Mexico as a low-risk country for money laundering, even when all the evidence said the opposite was true. When the U.S. Senate published its report on HSBC in 2012, the details were shocking. Between 2007 and 2008 alone, HSBC's Mexican operation moved around $7 billion in physical cash to HSBC's American branch. $7 billion in banknotes. In 2012, HSBC agreed to pay a fine of $1.9 billion to U.S. authorities. It was the largest bank fine in history at that time. But no individual bank executives went to prison. Critics were furious. They said the fine was just the cost of doing business for a bank that large. The money that was laundered through HSBC was worth far more than the fine that was paid. El Chapo himself was eventually captured, escaped, captured again, and finally extradited to the United States in 2017. He stood trial in New York in 2018. Witnesses described in extraordinary detail how the Sinaloa cartel moved its money. They talked about cash counting machines. They talked about payments made in grocery bags and shoe boxes stuffed with bills. They talked about bribes paid to government officials in Mexico worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They talked about a payment of $100 million made to a former Mexican president. The trial gave the world a rare and detailed look inside the financial operations of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. El Chapo was found guilty. He received a sentence of life in prison, plus 30 years. Modern drug lords do not always use physical cash anymore. The digital age brought new tools. Some cartels now use cryptocurrency. Bitcoin and other digital currencies can be moved quickly across borders without going through a traditional bank. Some criminal organizations have started using mixing services, which are digital tools that take one person's cryptocurrency and mix it with many other people's cryptocurrency, and then send it out again, making it very difficult to trace where the money originated. Others use decentralized exchanges, which allow people to trade cryptocurrency without providing personal identification. But governments are adapting too. Blockchain technology, the technology that underpins cryptocurrency, actually leaves a permanent record of every transaction. This record cannot be deleted or changed. And while it can be difficult to connect a specific cryptocurrency address to a specific person, it is not impossible. American and European law enforcement agencies have become increasingly skilled at analyzing blockchain data. In recent years, authorities have seized billions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency from criminal organizations. In 2022, U.S. authorities seized cryptocurrency worth approximately $3.6 billion that had been stolen in a hack years earlier. It was the largest ever financial seizure in Department of Justice history. The fight against money laundering has become a global industry. Banks around the world now employ hundreds of thousands of people whose only job is to monitor transactions and report suspicious activity. This field is called compliance. Governments have created international organizations like the Financial Action Task Force, known as FATF, to set global standards for anti-money laundering rules. Countries that do not meet those standards can be placed on a blacklist, which makes it very difficult for their banks to operate internationally. This creates enormous pressure on governments to take money laundering seriously. But criminals are always creative. They are always looking for new gaps in the system, new countries with weak rules, new financial instruments that regulators do not yet understand, new technologies that can move money faster and more quietly than before. The history of money laundering is in many ways the history of a race between criminals who want to hide their money and governments that want to find it. And that race has no finish line. Think about what we have seen in this story. We saw Pablo Escobar build an empire worth billions of dollars from cocaine and then struggle with the impossible task of hiding all that wealth. We saw BCCI become a global machine for criminal finance, serving drug lords and intelligence agencies and arms dealers under the cover of a legitimate bank. We saw the Sinaloa cartel develop sophisticated financial systems that use the global banking network to move and clean billions of dollars every year. We saw HSBC, one of the most respected names in international banking, fail completely in its duty to stop criminal money from flowing through its accounts. And we saw El Chapo stand trial in a New York courtroom while witnesses described in cold and precise detail the full machinery of a criminal financial empire. Money laundering is not a technical crime. It is not something that happens in a vacuum, far away from ordinary life. Every dollar or pound or euro that a criminal launders successfully is money that came from selling drugs to a real person, or trafficking a real human being, or corrupting a real public official. The financial crime and the human crime are not separate things. They are connected. The clean money and the dirty origin always belong to the same story. And that is the part that stays with you. Not the cleverness of the schemes, not the extraordinary amounts of money. What stays with you is the understanding that somewhere, behind every layer of offshore accounts and fake invoices and currency exchanges and shell companies, there were real people who paid the real cost. The person who bought the drugs, the neighborhood that lived in fear, the police officer who was given a choice between silver and lead, the judge who was threatened, the journalist who was killed. The money was laundered, but the story behind the money never was. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you found the story as powerful as I did, and I hope your English grew a little stronger while you were listening. The next video on English Noir is coming very soon, and it is going to take us into another story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. And before you go, I want to ask you one simple question. Leave your answer in the comments below. The question is this: do you think the banks that helped criminals launder money should face stronger punishments? Or do you think the individual bankers inside those banks should go to prison? Tell me what you think. I will see you in the next video.